The night air over the Rhine River felt sharp and metallic, the kind of cold that bites through wool and settles deep in the bones. It was late March 1945, and the war in Europe was almost over, though no one at the front could feel it yet. You can almost hear the low engines of armoured vehicles idling in the dark, smell fuel and wet earth, and feel the tension hanging over the riverbanks. Somewhere behind the Allied lines, telephones were ringing, messages were being typed, and tempers were rising. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below. What had just happened would shake the Allied command structure at the worst possible moment, and at the centre of it all was one explosive demand: that General George S. Patton be fired immediately. Only 36 hours earlier, Patton's Third Army had done what many believed was impossible. Without waiting for elaborate planning or dramatic announcements, his forces crossed the Rhine River, the last great natural barrier protecting the heart of Germany. They did it fast, aggressively, and with little warning. While other commanders were still organising large, carefully staged crossings, Patton had already smashed through. The speed stunned the Germans, impressed many Americans, and enraged one man in particular, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. To understand why this moment mattered so much, you have to step back a few days. On March 7th, 1945, American forces captured the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen intact. It was a gift of fate, and Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower immediately ordered units to exploit it. But Eisenhower's broader plan was cautious and balanced. He wanted strong crossings along the Rhine, a coordinated pressure, and a steady push into Germany without unnecessary risk. He also wanted unity among his senior commanders, a task that was often harder than fighting the Germans. Patton, commanding the US Third Army, had a different instinct. He believed speed was protection. He believed hesitation cost lives. And he believed the enemy was already cracking. On March 22, 1945, near the town of Oppenheim, south of Mainz, Patton gave the order. Under cover of darkness, his engineers quietly moved assault boats to the river. Infantry slipped across the water. Artillery followed. By the time higher headquarters fully realized what was happening, Patton was already on the east bank of the Rhine. The crossing was not bloodless, but it was swift. German resistance was scattered and confused. Many units were exhausted remnants, or short on fuel, ammunition, and morale. Within hours, bridges were being thrown across the river. Tanks rolled over them. Supply columns followed. Patton famously sent a message to Eisenhower that morning, full of his usual blunt confidence. He had crossed the Rhine without losing a man, he claimed, and he was already pushing east. For many American officers, it felt like a breakthrough, not just of terrain, but of momentum. The Rhine had been a psychological wall as much as a physical one. Now it was behind them. But in the British sector, the mood was very different. Montgomery had spent weeks planning Operation Plunder, a massive, set-piece crossing of the Rhine in the north. It involved airborne drops, heavy bombardment, and careful coordination. It was meant to be the grand, decisive moment of the campaign. Arthur Patton's sudden success threatened to steal that spotlight. Montgomery was not just annoyed, he was furious. To him, Patton's action was reckless, undisciplined, and politically dangerous. It upset the carefully balanced Allied plan and made British operations look slow by comparison. Worse, it fed into the growing perception that American generals were winning the war, while British forces were playing catch-up. In Montgomery's mind, this was not just about tactics. It was about prestige, command authority, and the future of post-war influence. Within hours, Montgomery began pressing his case. Messages went up the chain. Complaints were formal and sharp. Patton, he argued, had violated agreed plans. He had acted without proper coordination. He was a liability, a loose cannon who endangered Allied unity. The solution, Montgomery believed, was clear. Patton should be relieved of command. The demand landed on Eisenhower's desk like a live grenade. Eisenhower was not at the front. He was in his headquarters, surrounded by maps, reports, and the constant noise of a vast coalition war effort. He had spent years managing strong personalities, balancing national interests, and keeping the alliance together under extreme pressure. He understood Montgomery's frustrations. He also understood Patton's value. The question was not just what Patton had done, but what firing him would mean at this stage of the war. Eisenhower knew the facts. Patton's crossing had succeeded. It had caught the Germans off guard. It had opened another door into central Germany. It had not caused chaos on the Allied front, as Montgomery feared. In fact, it had forced the Germans to spread their already thin defences even thinner. Militarily, it was hard to argue with the results. But Eisenhower also knew the politics. Montgomery was not just any general. He was Britain's most famous field commander, a national symbol, and a man with strong backing from Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Ignoring him outright was not an option. Yet giving in to his demand could fracture American morale and remove one of the most aggressive commanders at the moment when speed mattered most. As Eisenhower considered his response, time was ticking. Patton's forces were still advancing. The front was fluid. The enemy was retreating, but not defeated. Decisions made now would shape how the final weeks of the war unfolded. Eisenhower's answer, when it came, was calm, firm, and unmistakable. And he refused to fire Patton. Instead, Eisenhower made it clear that initiative and success on the battlefield mattered more than wounded pride. He reminded Montgomery that Patton was operating under broad directives to exploit opportunities when they arose. The Rhine crossing, Eisenhower argued, was not an act of insubordination, but an example of decisive command. The war was not going to be won by waiting for perfect coordination. It was going to be won by keeping relentless pressure on a collapsing enemy. At the same time, Eisenhower did not dismiss Montgomery entirely. He smoothed the edges. He reassured him that Operation Plunder would still go forward and receive full support. He emphasized unity, cooperation, and the shared goal of ending the war as quickly as possible. But the core message was unmistakable. Patton was staying. Though, for Montgomery, it was a bitter pill. For Patton, it was a silent victory. And for the Allies, it was a turning point that revealed how close they were to the finish line. The Rhine crossing became a symbol of the final phase of the war in Europe. With Patton driving hard through southern and central Germany and other Allied armies pushing from the north and west, the German defence began to unravel completely. Cities fell in rapid succession. German units surrendered in large numbers. The end, once distant, now felt inevitable. Yet the tension between Patton and Montgomery did not disappear. It lingered in after-action reports, press briefings, and post-war memoirs. Each man would tell the story in his own way. Montgomery would continue to emphasize planning and order. Patton would celebrate speed and aggression. Eisenhower, as always, would focus on the bigger picture. What matters is what Eisenhower understood in that moment. Leadership in war is not just about rules and ranks. It is about judgment. It is about knowing when to rein in a commander and when to let him run. And in March 1945, with Germany on the brink of collapse, Eisenhower chose momentum over ego. The decision kept Patton in the fight. It kept the pressure on the enemy. And it helped ensure that the war in Europe would end not in months, but in weeks. The decision not to fire Patton did not end the tension. In many ways, it sharpened it. As March turned into April 1945, the Allied advance accelerated so fast that even seasoned stab officers struggled to keep up with the maps. Roads clogged with refugees, wrecked German columns, and endless lines of prisoners. The war was breaking apart, and not ending neatly. And in the middle of that chaos, General George S. Patton was doing exactly what Eisenhower had decided to protect, pushing forward without pause. Patton's Third Army did not slow after the Rhine. It surged. Within days, his armoured spearheads were deep inside Germany, moving through Hesse and toward the industrial heartland. Towns fell sometimes without a shot, sometimes after sharp, violent clashes that ended as quickly as they began. German officers later admitted they were stunned by the speed. Many believed the Rhine would buy them weeks. Instead, it bought them hours. You can almost feel the confusion on the German side, commanders waking up to find American tanks already behind them. Meanwhile, Montgomery launched Operation Plunder on March 23, 1945, near Wesel in the north. It was massive, deliberate, and meticulously planned. Airborne troops dropped behind enemy lines. Artillery thundered for hours. Engineers built bridges under fire. It was a successful operation by any standard, but it unfolded under an uncomfortable shadow. Patton had already crossed. The symbolic weight Montgomery wanted had been diluted. The headlines, especially in the American press, reflected that reality. This contrast fed Montgomery's resentment. He believed deeply that wars were won by control and preparation, not impulsive thrusts. To him, Patton represented everything dangerous about American command culture. Loud, fast, unpredictable, and now protected by Eisenhower himself. In private correspondence and staff discussions, Montgomery continued to argue that the Third Army's methods would eventually cause disaster, but events refused to support his case. Eisenhower watched all of this closely. His job had never been to command a single army in the field. His job was to command men, strong men, proud men, men with national reputations and personal armies of supporters. The Patton-Montgomery rivalry was not new, but by late March 1945 it reached its final and most dangerous phase. One wrong move could fracture Allied unity just as Germany was collapsing. Behind closed doors, Eisenhower made his position clear to his senior staff. The priority was speed. The priority was preventing the Germans from forming a new defensive line, especially in central and southern Germany. Intelligence reports warned that remnants of the Wehrmacht might attempt a last stand in Bavaria or the Alps. Whether realistic or not, Eisenhower was not willing to take chances. And Patton's momentum was a weapon, and he intended to use it. Patton sensed this support, even if Eisenhower never said it openly to him. His orders remained broad. Exploit success, maintain contact with the enemy, keep moving. And Patton did exactly that. By early April, Third Army units were crossing the main river, breaking through what little organised resistance remained. German formations disintegrated under pressure, surrendering by the thousands. Montgomery, watching from the north, could not ignore the results. But acknowledgement did not come easily. The rivalry was personal now, shaped by years of slights, misunderstandings, and competing visions of warfare. Montgomery believed Patton was reckless. Patton believed Montgomery was slow. Both men believed they were right. The deeper truth sat with Eisenhower. He understood that Patton's crossing of the Rhine was not a challenge to Allied authority. It was a symptom of a collapsing enemy. The German army in the West was no longer capable of responding coherently. Initiative, not restraint, was the correct response. Eisenhower's refusal to fire Patton was not favoritism. It was strategic clarity. By mid-April, the consequences of that decision were undeniable. Patton's forces liberated concentration camps, captured key industrial centres, and shattered German command structures in the south. The speed of the advance shortened the war and reduced the time the Nazi regime had to continue its crimes. Every mile gained mattered. Montgomery's armies also advanced steadily and successfully, but the narrative of the final weeks was shaped by motion. Fast arrows on maps, rapid encirclements, entire German armies collapsing in days instead of weeks. In that environment, Patton's style fit the moment. When Germany finally surrendered in early May 1945, the arguments did not disappear. They simply moved from headquarters to memoirs. Montgomery would later defend his caution. Patton, before his death later that year, would remain convinced he had been right all along. Eisenhower, writing with the distance of time, emphasized unity and restraint, careful not to inflame old wounds. But the record is clear. In March 1945, when Montgomery demanded Patton be fired, Eisenhower chose results over resentment. He chose momentum over politics. And he chose to trust a commander whose instincts matched the moment. Standing by the Rhine today, it is easy to forget how much hung in the balance during those cold nights of March. The river flows quietly. The bridges carry traffic instead of tanks. But in 1945, that water marked the edge of the final act. And one decision, made under pressure, helped ensure that act ended swiftly. Eisenhower never needed to shout or threaten. His answer to Montgomery was firm because it was grounded in reality. The war was being won, and Patton was one of the reasons why. In the end, that was all that mattered. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.